This is the last lesson in the grammar of words, where we're going to explore some of the properties that don't become apparent until we put multiple words together, but that are still often reflected in the form of words. Remember that this entire time we've been concerned with form, morphology. So let's consider 4 properties: possession, modification, agreement, and government. Let's stick with those 4 for now. Starting with possession. It has a fairly descriptive name. You can probably guess that it tends to deal with one noun possessing another noun, and that's the gist of it. In English, we show possession by adding an apostrophe-s suffix or clitic to the noun that is the possessor, and placing that noun before the noun that is the possessed noun. An example would make this clearer: John's car or the dog's bone. Both of these examples use the z allomorph of the apostrophe-s morpheme to show possession. Other languages show possession in other ways. For instance, the Romance languages use periphrasis. So does modern German. In languages that have one, a genitive case is perfectly fine for showing possession. So for instance, in Latin, canis puellae would be the girl's dog. And in that instance, we do the reverse of English. In the Romance languages, a periphrastic construction developed that replaced the old Latin construction. So you say the equivalent of the dog of the girl in basically every Romance language. Let's move on to agreement. Agreement involves one word matching the same property of another word. That's an awkward way to say it, but let me give you some examples. In Spanish, a masculine noun will be described by an adjective that takes a masculine ending. A feminine noun will be described by an adjective that takes a feminine ending. We sum that up by saying that the noun and the adjective agree. The adjective agrees with the noun. That's a case of agreement. The same thing happens in English between subject, nouns, and verbs. The word talks agrees with he, so we would expect to say he talks, but not I talks or you talks. So talks agrees with the third person singular subject. That's another case of agreement. The verb has to take a third person singular affix to show that it agrees with the third person singular subject. Let's distinguish agreement from government. The traditional account of government has us look at the word that is governing. In other words, we look for a word that forces another word to comply with a certain property. That's another awkward definition, but let's move on to some examples. In English, we have prepositions. If they take a pronoun, in other words, if they govern a pronoun like me, we expect that the preposition is followed by an object pronoun rather than a subject pronoun. In other words, the word accompanying the preposition must be in the object case. So I would say for me, but not for he. I instead say for him. I don't use the subject case pronoun after the preposition for, or any preposition for that matter. I use the object case. So we say that prepositions in English govern the accusative case of pronouns, or the object case of pronouns. It's very important to notice that government applies to verbs as well. If I say I saw him, the verb see, here in the past tense saw, prompts us to use an object case pronoun him rather than another subject case pronoun. That's another example of government. Contrast this with agreement. Agreement matches a property equally, while government pushes a word to have a property that the other word doesn't have. Now let's talk about modification. When an optional word is added that changes the meaning of another word, it modifies that other word. Adjectives and adverbs are the main modifiers in English. We have an example like, the gray cat ate dinner, in which gray is an adjective that modifies cat. You can see that if we remove gray, the cat still makes sense. Adverbs work similarly. For instance, if I say, the rabbit runs swiftly, swiftly modifies how the rabbit runs. We could just say that the rabbit runs. The extra material isn't necessary, but it does add something. It modifies the action. Notice that these properties start to push us away from looking at the form of words. We're already talking about the arrangement, the order of words in sentences. And with that, you're ready to move on to the grammar of sentences. I'm glad you stuck with me throughout this series, and thank you for learning with me.